Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming on such a lovely, typical London morning where it's raining outside. I don't know if it's still raining out there. My name is Christos Matskas. I am a software developer. I work as a consultant. I do a lot of things. I do server-side development. I do mobile apps. I do front-facing client website applications. That gives me quite a bit of a wiggle to test and try a lot of new things. I have a blog. I tend to be quite active on my blog, and I tweet quite a bit. And I have a few GitHub repos if you want to check them later on. Today, we will be discussing about ASP.NET 5, what's new, what's the new world order within Microsoft, where things are going. We'll see some of the features that are quite neat within the new ASP.NET 5, and then we'll try to do some demos. And if we have enough time, then I'll actually demo ASP.NET running on the Mac, which I think is quite a neat thing to see. Right, so people that have worked with Microsoft for some time, they know that they have been quite evil with regards to OSS in the past. They were quite adamant about providing any support to open source projects, and it was quite a very closed ecosystem. It was very hard to see how things were happening, what was inside, and the internals of the Microsoft stuff. Right. What about today then? How are things going today? We are on the opposite side of things, where things are going crazy on the Microsoft world. I think back in 2007, there was a bit of a turn. Quite a few new developers joined the team. And there was a lot of discussion between some really high-up guys thinking, what can we do for Microsoft? Where do we want to take things? And how can we embrace the community rather than trying to alienate more and more people? Starting that in 2007, I think the first open source project that was quite big was PowerShell. And that didn't have a massive impact at the time, but I think that was the kickstart for things to come. Come 2014-15, we had a series of major announcements, starting with Build last year, where they open sourced Roslyn. And under the .NET Foundation umbrella, we ended up having a lot of open source projects that they are used massively today. There are over 32 open source projects. If you go to the .NET Foundation page, you'll see that there's a whole list of them. And there are more and more projects being added all the time. Some of the highlighted projects, of course, is Roslyn, which is the new .NET compiler, which will be used by the .NET 4.5 and above. You got ASP.NET 5, of course. You go .NET Core, which is a subset of the full .NET framework. SignalR, which is a real-time application framework. MS Build, which was announced just last week. I don't know if you guys use it. Some are really keen, some are not too keen. But the idea is it's open source. Again, you can take it and do whatever you want with it. Orleans, which is the engine that powers Hello. And I think it's also used for other big data projects. OWIN, which is an open web interface framework that allows you to demodularize the front end from your server by using modules. So it makes things a lot more, so there's decoupling there. You don't have to rely on the IIS stack to run things. And then you got, of course, NuGet. What this means for you is that for any of these projects, you can just go and grab the repo, change it as much as you want, run it locally in a differentiated way, which is very exciting if you think about it, considering that in the old days, you had to run everything the Microsoft way. The ecosystem today is quite different to what it used to be before. And on the right-hand side, you'll see you got the full .NET framework, which includes your ASP.NET 5, ASP.NET 4.6, the WPF stuff, and of course, what's that one? Windows Forms, yeah, and web forms. On the left-hand side, sorry, my right, your left. So on the right-hand side, there is the .NET Core. The .NET Core includes a smaller subset. So if you think about the .NET framework having everything, the .NET Core is it's a smaller subset optimized for server deployment and cloud operations, and that includes the .NET Core, ASP.NET 5, and the universal apps. Underneath that, there's a nice layer that it's common for both frameworks. That includes your jitter, the new just-in-time runtime for Microsoft. Then you have your NuGet, and you also get the new Roslyn compiler, of course. And they're all open source. So the full stack runs on top of the common functionality. Now, some people might think that, right, OK, so we got the new stuff coming. What about the .NET framework and where things are going? The idea is that there's going to be a parallel stream of development. The .NET team is not going to abandon the full framework just to go with the optimized version. So things that are coming in .NET Core, they will feed back into the full framework, albeit a bit slower, though, because that's a full massive deployment. You have to wait for the next massive release of the .NET framework. Right. Now, another benefit of the fact that you have the common runtime and the new jitter is the fact that, say, if today you wanted to take advantage of the new features of Roslyn, for example, to run your web forms, you can do that. You can just download the Roslyn NuGet package, install it locally on your application, and then you can take advantage of the features that come with Roslyn. So you can see that they start to almost merge into one, although they are separate. This slide is quite interesting because you can see that in the center, what Microsoft is trying to achieve is in the center, they have the .NET framework plus your Visual Studio and all the other NuGet packages they can use. And then the idea is that they become so open now. So they allow you to take your stack, run it on a Linux server or a Windows server. And then for your front-end apps, again, they want you to be able to deploy your apps on iOS or Linux or Android or your Windows Phone or your Windows tablet. The idea is that you use one framework to do multi-platform work, which simplifies things for you. It makes development a lot easier. And also the fact that you don't have to rely on certain products. So you don't have to pay for a Microsoft server license to run your website. If that's what you want to do, you can do with your own flavor of Linux. And the road ahead. Right, so we're looking to have a lot more innovation. We are moving away from this monolithic .NET framework where things are just dumped onto you for every massive release that you expect to get. So you go from 4.5 to 4.5.1, 4.5.2, then 4.6, and so on. You do have that reliance, so you have to wait for Microsoft to release stuff. Things are going to become a lot more pluggable and a lot more modular, which means that you're moving away from that rigid structure, and you can say, right, I want to test this feature now, so I don't want to wait for the next release of a security framework, for example. Just plug it in and play, which makes things a lot more faster to work with. And of course, your end goal is to be able to run anywhere and everywhere. Okay. Right, so this is the existing silo approach that we are so accustomed in seeing. You got your Windows desktop applications, you got your Windows Phone apps, you got your ASP.NET 4, and then you got your tablet or your store apps, and then ASP.NET 5. Now, these apps, sorry, these stacks, you can see they have a lot of common functionality. So you could still get XAML, you could still get C#, although they tend to have different flavors, as we probably got accustomed to see. And things are becoming a little bit more unified with Windows 10, as we've heard from the announcements. However, you still have that silo approach where you can't really share things between, which causes a bit of disparity. What also is a big problem is the fact that it takes sharing code across quite a bit of an issue. So the idea is that we are moving away from that, and we'll see a lot more updates coming through. The idea is that we want to take the framework and probably have quarterly releases coming in from Microsoft officially, but there's nothing stopping you from going into the GitHub repo, grab the latest dev release or nightly build, test it with your app, and then if you don't like it, then you just, you can revert back to the full quarterly release version. So this is where .NET Core comes in, right? Up until this point, we had the full .NET framework, and we all got used to that. Every new feature had to come in through the usual updates. But .NET Core actually is quite innovative in what it tries to do. If we take, for example, say if you had a website with 10,000 pages, they did some benchmarks to see how long it will take to run the whole thing on the full .NET framework and how long it would take to run it on the .NET Core. Now, for the full framework, it took about 100 seconds, or about 100 seconds to compile the whole thing, right? And taking .NET Core, it took about a second and a half to compile those 10,000 pages and get the application up and running. Another big benefit using the .NET Core is that if you do a cold boot, so say you have a website running, an average website, you shut down your server, and you just boot it up and say, right, let's hit the first page and see how long it takes to boot. The current state of things, it takes about 13 to 15 seconds to boot up the whole thing, load up the DLLs, and do everything. And that's because the way that ASP.NET works, if some people don't know, is the fact that if you need to do anything, what happens behind the scene is everything gets fed to the CSC, it gets compiled, wrote, it's written into a temp folder, and then it gets served to you. So it has to touch the disk on top of everything else. So that's quite slow. With .NET Core, what happens is not only it's quite faster to start things up, because it takes about 2 to 3 seconds to start up the same site from a cold boot, but you also get that benefit of everything running in memory. So you never touch the disk, which is a lot faster when it comes to writing stuff. Another big benefit that you'll see further down with the demos is the fact that we are going to move away from the typical build, compile, or develop, write your code, compile, run. That's going to go away. It's coming with a lot of things. So right now with ASP.NET 5 and actually using Roslyn, it means that you can actually write your code, save, refresh, and that whole compilation goes away. So if you have a small project, it takes about 4 or 5 seconds. If you got a big solution with a lot of projects, you can expect 15, 20, maybe 30 seconds waiting for the build to complete. That all goes away. So it's the compilation is a step that has been taken away, and that's quite beneficial for your development process. What else can we say about here? Right. Now, also the idea with this .NET Core is the fact that everything is pluggable again. So for your runtime adaptation, you might opt to use a runtime that will allow you to run on, say, an IoT device like a Raspberry Pi. And nothing stopping you from loading .NET Core. And there's actually a very good example by Scott Hanselman that shows you how to take ASP.NET and run it on a Raspberry Pi. Albeit it's a bit tricky, but you can do it. Also, if you choose to go for a different runtime, in that case, if you want to run on a Mac, which is currently the case, since .NET Core is not actually out yet officially, then you can run it on a Mono. You can see that everything's plug and play. If something else comes along the line, then there's nothing stopping you from using that either. And of course, you can use any application model you want. At the moment, we have ASP.NET and Universal Apps supported, but anything that can be built on top of .NET Core, as things get added and as time goes by, you'll see that a lot more things will be built on top of .NET Core, and you're moving away from the reliance on the full .NET framework. Okay, next one. Right, NuGet is integral to the whole .NET Core. Everything is NuGet. Even the .NET Core comes as NuGet. Everything is packages. There's no GAC anymore. That's a relic of the past. And moving forward, there will be no DLLs ever being installed in the GAC. You never have that reliance. And that allows us to move from the Windows ecosystem to the Linux ecosystem or the Mac. Excellent. That means that if you want to grab something, just go and grab NuGet. And now NuGet is open source as well, so everything starts to tie together. So the .NET Core starts at the BCL, which is also a package, and then everything else that you need to add as a feature or a functionality, again, has to be a .NET Core. Also, .NET Core has been reduced in size. The full .NET framework is about 200 to 300 megabytes. The new .NET Core is about 15. Sorry, actually, it's like less than 10. It's about 8.9 megabytes, which means that you can push your applications a lot faster to the client. If you have to do anything with the .NET Core, just ship it across with your application, and then that's you. You don't have to wait for the full .NET framework to be installed. This is a very interesting slide. I like this one because it shows you what's the state of development right now and what you can do. And you can see on your left-hand side there, you got your codes, you got your NuGet packages, you got your app model, you got your BCL. You feed them through Roslyn. You get your intermediary language, and then you have the choice. You can either move it up to Windows Store if it's a Store app or a Windows Phone app. And then that gets compiled using C++, so it's a lot faster. You get your executables and you just distribute them through the store. Or if you go down the ASP.NET route, you still get your jittering and you get your applications up and running. Now, C# is very close to C++ performance, but you are always going to get a hit from the JIT. So even though you are still down to 2 or 3 seconds when you try to run your application, we can do better. There is a plan over there to actually go down the .NET Native, and you might actually be able to choose whether you want to use the jitter or you want to compile it in C++, and get another benefit boost in your application. Also, as I said, core CLR and references are deployed as part of your application. So again, you don't have to worry about that. I know that the team at the moment are working really, really hard in looking into performance. They have done some really amazing things, but even if they can save 10 to 15 seconds, they have a lot of internal reviews right now where they can see, right, do we really need this piece of functionality? Can we actually take these 15 milliseconds off the loading? So the goal is to go down to sub 1 second when it comes to ASP.NET apps, which will make them almost like native apps. So you'll never really think that this is a web page you try to hit, even for the first time when you load stuff. Now, a fun story I was listening yesterday is that with regards to the full .NET framework and the core, there was a bug at some point within Microsoft when every time they were pushing a new .NET framework update, it was engineering across the globe. So you had like millions and millions of devices. The first time they were trying to hit the first app, they had to recompile the whole .NET framework, and that would take like 50 or 60 seconds, so people were wondering what's happening. So these are all going to go away. Things like that we're never going to see again with the benefit of .NET Core. Right, so where does ASP.NET fit within this world, right? So some people are wondering, is it going to be 2 ASP.NETs, one running on the full .NET, one running on the core .NET? If you are going to take something away from here today, it's probably this, like it's one ASP.NET 5. Everything is being unified. You got your MVC, you got your web API, and you got your SignalR, all running under the same model. And then you can choose whether you want to run on a 4.6 framework, which is the full stack, or whether you want to run on the .NET Core. Now, this is where limitations come in, because 4.6 actually supports things that .NET Core doesn't. So if you have a reliance, for example, on system.drawing, where you want to do some compression or image manipulation on your website as people upload it, in that case, you can't really do it through the .NET Core because most of the system libraries have been pulled out to reduce the size, which means that if your website, your existing website is running on 4.5 and does things with certain libraries, then in that case, you are restricted to that. The idea is that you use the .NET Core when you want to optimize for server and cloud. Also, when you build ASP.NET apps on in Visual Studio right now, you're actually building against both frameworks. So if you run from the command line, you'll see that it builds twice. And that's because you can actually choose whether you want to, at any point, whether you want to do a full deployment on the full framework or whether you want to take advantage of the .NET Core. But the idea is that we only have one ASP.NET, so there's no need to worry about different functionality. Right, so how do things work today? On your left-hand side, we have the existing functionality. So you can see you got, at the baseline, you got your operating system. Everything is restricted to Windows. You can't take your ASP.NET app and run it on Mac. That's not happening. Then you got your runtime loader, which again is .NET specific. So you need to have IIS to run things, otherwise you can't serve any pages. And then you have your .NET CLR to do your runtime and so on. So again, as you go throughout the stack, you can see that you have really, really tight coupling with the Windows OS ecosystem. You need IIS, you need the GAC, you need, of course, the CSC to compile everything. So moving to the right-hand side, you can see that things change quite a bit. So you have Windows, OS X, and Linux supported. You have the .NET executable, the DNX. It used to be called KPM up until last week. So on beta 4 right now, you can run as DNX, but it's a bit experimental, so things are not as stable as you would expect them. Then you have the .NET CLR and the core CLR, of course. And then again, things that would be part of Windows ecosystem have been stripped away and replaced by the .NET executable as DNX. And then everything is NuGet. You don't have reliance on the GAC. You don't have reliance on the framework at all. So that's quite advanced. And then the biggest benefit is that apart from your operating system, everything else in that stack is open source. If anything doesn't fit your needs or doesn't match your requirements, then you can just grab it, change it, create your own version, and then run it the way you like it, which is very, very interesting if somebody wants to do that. Okay. Right. ASP.NET features, right? So going now into the core of what's new in ASP.NET and how we can take advantage of the new features. Is everything good? You know, it's interesting to see what the team has done with the framework. So going through agility, right? A faster development cycle. As we said before, everything ships as NuGet. Everything is modular. We're moving away from that monolithic .NET framework where for anything new, you have to wait for the new release. That also means that the framework is also part of your code. So when you release, you can actually move your application with the .NET Core. Now, what does this really mean? It means that you can run applications side by side. So if you are developing, or if you have a team developing on, say, ASP.NET 4.5.1, using the framework, and then deploy the server, and then somebody else comes and says, all right, I would really like to use the 4.5.2 features. Then when they grab that, what they have to do to deploy it to the server is they actually have to push 4.5.2 to the server. Your server gets updated to 4.52. If 4.5.1 had a breaking change or something changed between the two, then the first team is tough, so they have to go and fix it. With .NET Core, it means that you can actually deploy as many applications you want side by side. And you don't have to wait for any new functionality. You can actually take an ASP.NET 5 application today or a .NET Core application today, anything that's built on top of the .NET Core, deployed on any server today, side by side, having different versions of .NET Core. Because everything is actually a NuGet package, everything is just on the file system. It means that you can deploy side by side without worrying about breaking changes. You can have experimental streams where things are a lot more faster, and you just try to test stuff. You want to deploy and maybe have some beta users, that's absolutely fine because you don't have to wait for the next major release. You don't have to worry about whether your DevOps have upgraded your server to 4.5.2 and broke everything on the way. So you do get a lot faster development cycle without having to worry about major updates coming down. More control as well. Now, in the past, Microsoft would just say, patching Tuesday. Let's push 10,000 updates to your server and see what happens. That's not going to happen anymore. The only thing that is going to be pushed as a mandatory will be mandatory patch will be zero-day security patches. Anything else, you will have the choice whether you want to grab the latest update. You can test it on your server, see what happens, and then upgrade rather than having to go through that same cycle over and over and over again. Also, with the .NET Core, it means that when you use .NET Core to develop your apps, you actually have confidence that whatever you develop on your dev machine or whatever you use on your QA server gets deployed to the server in the end, like your production server. You can take your app and deploy it with the .NET Core. So you actually know which version of the .NET Core you have on your server. So you get that consistency. You don't have to worry about, right, OK, so it works on my machine. I upload the server, and suddenly things don't work because some patches are missing or the .NET framework is incompatible. That's very good to have in your arsenal. Right? And any new versions that come down from or get pushed by the team, again, you can choose whether you want to use the mainstream or the trunk, or you want to use the branch, which is a bit more experimental. Again, you have control on that. You can change it on your machine. It's a very easy flag to switch. And then, again, if things don't work for you, you can just go back. And because everything is on the file system, again, remember, you don't have to, it's not like you install .NET Framework 4.5 and you have to uninstall it, resulting in massive breakages in your operating system. All you need to do is just wipe out the file, as we'll see later on, and then that's you. That version is gone forever from your machine. Speed. We did this say about that. Roslyn now allows you to save and refresh. You don't have to compile ever again, right? If you actually do a build, all you do is just syntactically check that your code is fine. And if you got resharper on top of everything else, then that means that you don't even have to do that. You just get the ugly squiggles underneath, and then you know that there's something wrong, which is really great considering that you don't have to go through those 10, 15 seconds waiting for things to build. Again, the framework is part of the application, the .NET Core, really fast, really quick to do things, and then you can get your features, just plug them in and play. Improved performance. We did say that the runtime now takes about, the startup takes about 2 to 3 seconds to run. There is work done against it to try to get to a sub 1 second. We'll see improvements coming in, but even if that's not a sub-second, then you do get massive performance improvements to what it used to be before, because you don't have to load the whole .NET framework again. Lower memory in general, again, you only rely on the .NET Core. You don't have to have the whole .NET framework booting up and engineering on your machine, which means that the memory footprint will be a lot smaller. And there's a lot of work being done on reducing the HTTP request size, so they actually managed to reduce it over 90%. So things are really down to the bare metal when it comes to using the ASP.NET 5 framework. Again, modular. When you create an empty application, you only get like five files and a folder structure. There's nothing there. Actually, if you try to run it, you get 404. There's nothing to run. There's nothing to be served. So when you run the application, it says, I don't know what to do. Which means that any feature that you want to add, even the BCL has to come as part of your NuGet packages. There's nothing there for you. That's really, really good, considering that in the past, when you created a new ASP.NET app, you got a ton of DLLs as part of the project, even though you didn't want to use them. So Entity Framework used to be part of ASP.NET. I don't want to use Entity Framework. Why should I have to go and remove that? Everything is opt-in. That's quite important. Even static files will not be served unless you actually choose to serve static files. Modular, yeah, we said that. And raw sockets, again, if you just want your app to serve just a socket, open up a socket, serve something, then you can do that. You don't have to bring the whole MVC in play just to do that. Or if you want to take advantage of the full framework, you can also do that. And how about combining both? So you can have some requests coming in, served by a raw socket, and then just sit them out. And then you can take advantage of MVC and just serve some other pages if you want to, depending on the request type. And of course, you can plug a lot more things, like you have interceptors to do stuff. And it's very easy to do so because everything, again, is pluggable. Cloud ready. We have a simple transition between, it's like seamless, between your premises and the cloud. The idea is you should be able to take your application and run it anywhere without changing your code. And the way to do that is by removing the web config. There's no web config, no web config transformations. That's all gone, right? So how do you do that? You might question, right? We needed to find a way to make it easy to transition from Windows to Linux to Mac. And the easiest way to do that is by using environmental variables, because this is the lowest common denominator. Every operating system has environmental variables. So ASP.NET 5 relies heavily on environmental variables. And I think they're working on a way to easily create them through the GUI, even through Visual Studio, rather than having to go on the command line and enter them. But the idea is that you don't have Windows, so you don't have the web config anymore. You don't have the reliance on the file. So if you deploy on Mac OS, then you don't get that, well, I don't know what to do with that file. Right, cloud ready as well. It means that by using environmental variables, and say, for example, if you're using Azure, then you can create environmental variables on Azure, and your website will automatically work because it knows what to do. Things like session and cache were also quite different between the on-premise and the cloud. Now, this has been actually merged into one model. So when you add session, then when you deploy to the cloud, then the cloud knows exactly how to deal with that session model and how to deal with the caching. So it's taken care of for you automatically. You don't have to, different implementations for your local server or your VM or say, a website running as a platform as a service. Diagnostics, again, in the past, if you had issues with your application, you had to get your copy of the code, add some tracing in there, upload, build, test it, and upload to the cloud. These days, that's like a flag that you have to switch, and it automatically starts tracing for you. So you don't have to rebuild and redeploy to your servers to do so. And another major benefit, if you are using Azure, for example, which is the Microsoft Cloud, then in that case, if you want to actually troubleshoot something and you have an idea where it could be roughly, then you can go in Visual Studio, attach to the remote application running on the cloud, and say, right, I want to debug that. So you can put breakpoints in your code running against the cloud, having live hits from your users or your self-testing, and you will be able to debug locally. So you don't have to, you don't even have to use tracing if you're not aware of what's happening. If you know where the code is, fix it, and then just redeploy. Another major thing that I didn't mention earlier with Roslyn is the fact that since Roslyn doesn't rely on compilation anymore, it means that you can actually develop anywhere. So if you actually want to use Monaco, which is the online editor for Microsoft, you'll be able to, or any other site that can actually load your code, then you'll be able to edit your code on the fly. So say if you're out and get a call, things are broken, please come and fix them. Just boot up your browser, go into the site, change the code, save, and that change will be there. You don't have to compile, you don't have to worry about that. So that's quite fantastic. Truly open source, yeah, we saw that. The goal is to be able to run anywhere and everywhere. With the runtime, the .NET Core, you'll be able to run on Windows. Currently, .NET Core is available for Windows, and there's a version coming for Linux and Mac. At the moment, if you want to run on those platforms, then you have to rely on the Mono, which is not that much different with regards to the setup, but unfortunately, we don't have the full .NET Core available to us yet. And as I said, editors, again, you can use Visual Studio. You can use any other editor. If you fancy doing your development in Notepad, then you can do that, because all you have to do is just save the file, and it will be picked up automatically. And then cloud editors, as I said, Monaco supports it at the moment. There will be a lot more things to come. And hardcore level, if you really want to take it a level up, then you can use the console to do things. Because whatever you can do in Visual Studio for .NET Core, especially with regards to building and running and testing and booting up a browser, then you can do it from the command line. So it's quite cross between the GUI and the command line. Standard tools, we have full support for HTML5, CSS3, and all the standards that are out there at the moment. The idea is that we want to be a lot more adaptive with the way that we work within Visual Studio. And using the .NET Core, it means that things can come a lot faster. Also, Visual Studio is seeing a lot more changes coming faster rather than have to wait on massive releases. You'll be able to get chunks of functionality coming in. And that means that any changes in the standards or anything that needs to be maybe trial new features, then it will be easily passed on to the development environment without having to rely on major new releases. Tooling support. A lot of people like to work within the browser. So you get people that, even though they are developers, they do spend a good amount of time troubleshooting the front end, like changing CSS files or changing JavaScript. Now, in the past, you would do your changes, and then you would copy from the browser editor and then move it back into Visual Studio. With the new functionality, there's a bidirectional binding between the two. Changes that you do in Visual Studio will be automatically fed into your web tools. So if you got Chrome web tools, then DevTools, then you can see the changes there. And vice versa, if you like to work a lot more on the front end using your DevTools on the browser, then there's nothing stopping you from, so actually just it will feed the changes back into Visual Studio. So you don't have to jump between one and another just to keep them in sync. And client tools, that's another big change. Up until this point, we had all these Web Essentials and other third-party tools that will allow us to manipulate, especially CSS files like Sass or TypeScript. Things had to be added on. Now, for the first time ever, I don't know how that happened, but Microsoft decided not to do it their way. And they like the fact that there is a very mature set of tools set out there, tools for doing very basic stuff like getting packages for the web. So rather than saying, I want to download the jQuery library or use a CDN, you can actually use Power and Grunt to do that for you. Everything is based on a node, so you do have a dependency on node. But then again, a lot of things have dependency on node these days, so I don't think it's a major issue. And the fact that you have full-blown support within the Visual Studio, these are not like glorified editors that you just say, right, I want to create a grunt task within Visual Studio, and then that's it. You actually get full intelligence within Visual Studio, as we'll see later on. And you also get any errors that come from those tasks will actually be fed into your error output window, so you can see it within Visual Studio. You don't have to go and check external tools to see what happens. Now, legacy code. By legacy, I mean anything that has been running up until this time. Well, got bad news for you guys. I'm just kidding. There is the ability to run stuff on the new platform, right? Unfortunately, there's no direct path. So a lot of people ask, what can I do with my 4.5 MVC app? Can I upgrade it to 5, and can I take advantage of the new .NET Core? Now, unfortunately, there's no direct path. You can still upgrade to 4.6 and take advantage of the new Roslyn features, like language features. C#6, for example, can come through Roslyn. You don't have to wait for the new major release. But unfortunately, there's no direct upgrade path. And then to tell you the truth, if your application relies on things like system.web, which is one of the things that has been stripped out, or if it relies on libraries that are not available on the .NET Core, then you actually don't want to upgrade to .NET Core. The idea of the .NET Core is that you create an app that is optimized for the cloud. And at the moment, if you want to do so and you really, really insist on moving your app there, then you have to do a bit of rewriting, as I said, because of the reliance on the existing libraries. Right, so getting started with ASP.NET, there's a lot of information on the ASP.NET vNext website. I think they kept the vNext name for now. I don't know if they're going to change it. So if you go to ASP.NET vNext, you get instructions on how to install and download. At the moment, you rely on a CTP version of Visual Studio 2015. That's the only place where you can do your testing for ASP.NET 5. And the documentation is quite comprehensive, both on the vNext website, where they have quite a few demos and walkthroughs, and also information on how to get started. And they also direct you to the GitHub, where is the official repo. You can go and get code samples, and you can download the whole thing and run it on your machine if you want to. It's quite big, though, so just be aware. With regards to the code, I already said that stuff are on GitHub. So there's a different branch for ASP.NET, and there's a different branch for .NET Core. It's open. You can go and do pull requests, and the community is quite engaging as well. I think there was an infographic. I should have attached to that. But they do get a lot of community pull requests coming in. It's not a case of, yeah, we open source, but we are ignoring you guys. They do genuinely expect people to go and submit. If there's something that you don't like, this is the time to speak up. You can raise an issue, and you can help the team move it forward. So you can never really use the same excuse, or, oh, you know what, ASP.NET 5 is crap, I don't want to use it. You can change it if you want to. Getting help. The ASP.NET forums are quite good, although I tend to see a lot more movement on the older issues like ASP.NET 5 at the moment. Sorry, ASP.NET 4.5 rather than the latest one. The Jabber channels, they have a Jabber channel for ASP.NET VNext, and they also have one for OmniSharp, which is the open source tools for OS and Linux. The guys over there are quite active. Even guys from the team, they are in these rooms and can help out. I did use them quite a bit in the last few weeks. So don't be shy, and they're quite helpful. And Stack Overflow, not that many issues there, but you still get answers if you get stuck. Unfortunately, it seems to be some recurring issues. And I have to say, it's still experimental. You should expect a lot of things to break if you decide to engage with ASP.NET 5. Things can break, and because things are changing all the time, you do get releases almost every week now. If things don't work, then you need to become a bit more, you need to be able to just adjust and work with it. If it doesn't work, just roll back and start from the scratch. Right, some demos now. Right, let's see what we can do with ASP.NET 5. Quite a few things here, actually. Okay, let's just open. First thing first, the command I'm using right now is kpm. It's for kpm is one of the commands that you get with the ASP.NET 5 when you install it. You install it through KVM, which is the K version manager, and that allows you to KVM list. If we do that, it will tell us which versions of the .NET 5, the core we have installed on the local machine. Just a moment, I'll just magnify that. Can you see now? And so if you run KVM list, it will also give you all the versions that you have currently installed. At the moment, I have the beta 3, which is the latest stable one, and I have defaulted to the beta 3 full CLR. You'll see at the bottom there's two. There's the core CLR 64 and 86. I'm sorry, guys. Oh, I know. It always does it to me. Roberto, can we have a hand, please? Schoolboy error here, even though we tested it before. Let's see. did test it before, right? The slides were playing fine.
Nothing come out.
Yeah, it's just blank. So if I do duplicate and say apply, if I do extend, it works fine. So extending works fine. Keep changes, and then if I do and say duplicate, so I want to have that one, and then apply that. It's almost like it's not picking up the. That's not good. So there's definitely that one. Okay. You know what? I'll just.
Should be.
Well, it should be different. Oh. Lift off. There you go. Right. Sorry, guys. Sorry for that. Okay. So now you can see it. Back to the stuff I was saying. KVM list will give you the list of the currently installed files on your local system. Again, we did say these are all just based on the file system. And if you want to double check that, if we go into under my account, see Christos, you'll see there's a K over there. So that's where the K runtime is. And then packages, oh, one up. Runtimes. So exactly what you see in here, right? We can see it in the file system. Now look what will happen if I don't know. You can change as well, so you can say KVM use, and then you can force your KVM to your environment to use a different CLR. So I can say 1.1, 0.0. KPM use. Help to the rescue. Anything like that. Okay, so you can see the list of the commands you can do here. Now, if I go into the file system and do that against any advice, so let's do delete. Right? If I go back into here, KVM list, you'll find nothing. So let's go and grab it again. KVM upgrade. goes into the public repo now, and we'll say, right, I found the beta 3, which is a stable one, and we'll start downloading the latest version. And we should go back. So it adds to the path as well. It decides what the default is, and there you go. You got it here. Why was there only one? OK, well, let's move on. Right, so let's start with Visual Studio and see how we can go about and create a new ASP.NET application. New project. Under web, you have the 3 options, the ASP.NET web application, a class library. Up until very recently, if you wanted to add a class library into your ASP.NET project, you actually had to create an ASP.NET class library. It's really badly named, but the idea is that was the only thing that you could add as a reference, external reference to your project. Up until last week, I think that was the case. Now you can add any third-party DLL to your app as long as it makes sense. So if it's a .NET Core, then you need to make sure that it's compliant. But other than that, you can use any library, which is quite nice. You can even create console apps if you want to. So let's go and create a web app. The next window is still subject to change, because at the top you have your the existing way of creating web applications. And you can see you can select down here. You can select web forms, MVC, web API. You can choose to host to Azure if you want directly. And going down to the new stuff, you can see they're new because they have the blue little icon at the top. So the preview one is a totally empty one, as I said before. The ASP.NET preview starter starts with some libraries that can help you get off the ground much quicker, and then you can create a web API, just a web API if you want to. Again, just limited to the web API functionality. In this instance, let's create a full one. You can see down here, you don't have the option to deploy to Azure as yet, but that's a work in progress. So eventually, once you create your new ASP.NET 5 application, you'll be able to deploy automatically to Azure, should you choose so. I'm keeping the solution open now because some interesting things will happen as we, of course, no responding. OK, if you look quickly down here, you'll see there's references restoring. It actually goes to NuGet now and tries to grab all the packages that we require. Now, the good thing about that is that if you've already worked with the packages that you require for your app, it actually looks into your local cache. There's a local cache that keeps them on your disk. So if there's no updated version, or if you don't need to have an updated version, and you're on the plane, you don't need internet connectivity. You can just use your local cache to pull the packages along and then start working with your app, which is a nice thing to have if you're disconnected from the internet. Oh. Right, I think it's just restored now. First thing first, let's just start our app. First thing, www-root. This is where all your static files go, right? So HTML files, CSS, JavaScript, that's where it ends up. There's a nice disconnection between your files that will be eventually deployed to the web and your code. So everything under www-root should be static files only. And that's the advice that we get from Microsoft. And if we open that up, you'll see there's some basic files here and folders. We have CSS, the images, the libraries. Actually, under libraries, you get all the JavaScript things that are required for your website. And we'll see how these get there. The next thing that we're going to look at is the project.json. Now, we did say there's no web config. As you can see from here, there's no web config anywhere to be seen. So the question is, how do you configure your site? How does it know what to do? Everything is driven through JSON these days. And as such, we have a project.json, which is the central file for your whole ASP.NET app. In here, you'll see there's a few interesting things. At the top, we have the www-root, which matches our www-root in the folder in the file system. You can name that anything you want. You can change that name if you wish so. With regards to the version, this is where you say, I want everything to be 1.0.0 blah. And then if you want to force a specific version within your app, then you can do it here. So this is for your specific app, but you can also do a global one. There's a global JSON at the top. And this one knows that your SDK that you currently use is 1.0.0. Now, things that you do through the JSON file, you can also do through the GUI. So you don't have to get into the file system, into the file and the editor if you don't want to. So the things that you saw over there, if we go into properties, so you can see here that that's the name of the app. And then you can say build, and in here you can choose, what is it? Sorry, debug. In here you can actually choose the specific runtime. So if I say I want to use a specific runtime, then it will go down here and select it. Now, I only have one down here, but it should be OK. OK, so that's Control S on that one. Sorry, back into the project JSON. At the top, we have, let me just minimize that. At the top, we have the www version, and then you have all the dependencies. So the dependencies is what tells your website what kind of NuGet packages you need available. This is where you say, right, I want to download anti-framework, or I want to add something into my app. So, and there's full intelligence within the system. And to test that, we're just going to go and say Microsoft. Is that visible, guys? Yeah? It's small. OK, good. And say framework. And then I want cache memory. Now, what happens over there? It automatically knows that I have one currently sitting on my file system. Or did it go away? Away. Don't go away. Come on. It goes away. Doesn't like it. Anything that you see with a folder next to it and version means that it's currently local on your machine. If there's a different version that you can go and grab, like an earlier version or a newer version, then you can actually select it from down here. So there will be a full list. What it does actually goes to the NuGet package, does a request and says, get me all the packages with that name, and then you can choose to select which one you want to use, in which case I'll go with that one. Now, pay close attention to what happens to the left-hand side as I save the file. Under references, you see it's actually restoring right now. You don't have to wait to build or do an extra step to say, right, I want to download all the packages that are relevant to my application. What it does, just every time you do a change within here, it actually goes and adds that package. So if we look into ASP.NET 5, there should be one for caching. Again, we did say everything is a NuGet package, right? So you can get the nice icon over there. You can see that it says, right, I'm a NuGet package, and that's where I belong. But Microsoft C# on the full .NET framework, as you can see, it's part of the system. So it's a file that exists in the GAC. That's where it's found. All right, so on here, we just added framework cache, and it's here. Now, look what's going to happen if I remove it. So say you don't want to work with that anymore. And if we save that, right, it's gone. So it knows exactly whatever you do on the project.json file, it syncs automatically with your references. Right. Next down here, we also have the commands, which allow you to do things outside your normal IIS pipeline. So if you want to run anti-framework commands from the command line, and you don't want to use the Visual Studio IDE, then you can just call the command, as I'll show you afterwards. Also, any command that you add down there will also be available up here. At the top, you get your IIS Express, which is the default way to run your application. But you also get any command that gets added into the commands. So if I say, let's duplicate that, because it's fun. So, and Control-C. An extra quote there. Save that. Now if we go up here, You see how that appears automatically over there? Visual Studio works really nicely with the file system. So it's like it always monitors your file system, like a good watcher over there. So it watches what happens and then just updates the ID based on what you've done. All right, let's remove that so it doesn't confuse things. And let's move on to the next item in the list. We did discuss about NuGet. NuGet has changed dramatically when it comes to integrating with Visual Studio. Things that you do through the JSON file, project JSON file, you can also do through your, sorry, one thing I didn't mention about the reference is the fact that every time you add a reference about something, it will be added on both levels. If it's a NuGet package, like it needs to be, then it will be added both in the ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core. Right underneath the full one, we have the core. And you can see here, there's only NuGet packages. There's no system files. There's no GAG DLLs in here to confuse things. All right, so moving into the references now. So NuGet, let's say you wanted to go to the GUI and add something through NuGet. Just open my manage NuGet packages. This is your new NuGet package manager. It's not model anymore. You can have 10 windows open at the same time if you want to do so. And you can drag it in outside the, this is very small, right? I'm trying to maximize things as much as I can. Frozen. Right, okay, so I think I don't think I can change the ID. I can change the options here for fonts. It's 14. I'll make it 16 and see if that helps. Unfortunately, certain things are in the ID, so you can't change them. Right, okay, so with regards to the NuGet packages now, you can select which stream you get, if you want to have experimental, if you want to have steady stream. On the right-hand side, you have on the left-hand side, you get your packages. You can do a search for them. One of the cool things that you get, again, as I said, is no model, so you can have multiple windows open at the same time. So it doesn't stop you from working with anything else on in the application. And also, for the first time, you can do versions. So if you go here, you'll see there's a latest version. Latest table. It's the first time you can downgrade from within NuGet without having to open the command line. So you can say, right, I want a different version to install. We'll be absolutely happy to pick it up. And you also get the dependency behavior. So you can say, I want the lowest dependency to come in. So if you have say if you're working with Azure and you have the Azure SDK and you want to use the Azure storage because of the package, then you can say, I want the lowest possible version of the Azure storage to come as part of the SDK, and that will be absolutely fine. File conflict as well, it will prompt you, or you can say override and so on. So you can see that there's a lot of work that has been done into the project. And finally, if I come out from that and say filter all installed, I will actually show you all the stuff that you have installed on your through the project.json file. Okay, next one. Let's move on to the next one, which is right. And the startup, we had the global ASACs in the past. Now we have a startup.cs, and this is where things go in. The first thing that we say is there's a config.json, which allows you also to pass some certain parameters in there, but you should not use that if you're using sensitive information. So if you have a connection string to your database, you shouldn't go in the config.json. But the idea is that this is how you say, right, for the configuration of my application, I want to add, I want to have, go away. I want to have the config.json that has some parameters in there and some key value pairs. And then I also want to use the environmental variables. And when you start it up, it just knows how to put and get the parameters required for your application. And further down, we have the configuration services. In here, you say what kind of services you want to have. This is where you add your MVC, your entity framework, identity providers. And finally, if we go down to the configure, this is where you say, I want to do certain things like add console. I want to add the MVC and be able to run it. This is where I want to add a socket or an interceptor. This is where you say use static page or use the error page, for example, which is quite nice. You don't get that yellow screen of death anymore. You get a nice stack tracer. Now you can see over here, we actually test whether that's a development environment. We don't want to expose that to our users, but the idea is that The new user error page is a lot more functional because it gives you details about the error rather than saying failed. Okay, come out from there. So that's all the plugin that you have to do. Again, you can define static routes if you want to. Again, remember you can have configurable routes or routing attributes on your controller methods now, so you don't have to define hard-coded routes if that's an option. Again, remember what I said, static files. HTML files are not served by default. You actually need to say to your application, I want to use static files. Please serve HTML and CSS and static pages. So with that out of the way with regards to configuring things, let's run it. This is our page, right? It runs fine. This is the startup page that we have here, running on Bootstrap. So let's do the thing that I said before. What will happen if I did a change in the code, and I want to see how that reacts, right? Back into the code. I'll open one of the controllers. I'll go to the home one, and I'll change the contact to return a string. In the past, you couldn't change that. You couldn't change the controller actions to return something else. In this case, we'll just say string, and we'll just return a message. Hello, DevWeek. Save that. No compilation. Hands off the keyboard. Go into home, contact. There's a little bit of a lag, but there you have it. That's it. So no more building and running. Just change the code, and we'll change automatically for you. And just to prove so, just go back here and say hello DevWeek. Again, save that, back to the browser. There's a bit of a lag here. You can see there's still Roslyn just boots up in the background and does it for you. But then you have it, hello DevWeek again. One of the things I wanted to show you is using the command line. So we saw how you run the application through Visual Studio. So how do you do it through the command line? First, we need to issue a KPM restore. That goes and gets all the packages in case we were missing them. We'll also run the Bower task at the bottom, which I will talk about in a second. And then if we want to run it, so we can run a K command is for you to run any of the commands within the project.json. We can say kweb. That boots up. Is that? All right, I'm in the wrong. SRC. I always do that. Right? And then cd web. What it said over there is unable to find the project.json. That's because I was on the wrong level. So I need to just go 2 levels down in the file system. And then if I do kweb, it should find it fine and say, right, I found something. I'm booting up a web server for you. So you can see now we have a web server running at localhost 5000. So that's the port over there. So if I open another window here and say localhost, there you go. So now, rather than using the IIS Express pipeline, all I do is just put up a local web server, and that serves the website for us. Nothing changed there. And then again, it's exactly the same as you would be running it, just the fact that you can run it outside the web. Now, this web service that I have here is specific to Windows, but we'll see how you can run the same thing in Mac in a short time. So here you have the ASP.NET hosting, and that's the server. And then if I scroll to the left, that's where you define and say, that's the URL I want to run under localhost 5000. And one of the other neat things in here is the fact that we have, as I said, full support for Bower and Grunt. So if we go into the Bower file, you see that we have dependencies. So we say, I want to get Bootstrap, I want jQuery, jQuery UI. If you hover over items, Bootstrap carousel, I think internet needs to be quite fast to pick it up. Let me just do, right, okay, so you get full intelligence. What happens now is you say, I want to get a Bower package, but I don't know what it is. Rather than going to the internet and start looking for it, you can actually go in here and start typing things. And as you type, it has full intelligence, so it will know it does a search on the web service and says, right, do I have any package that matches that? So if we wanted to add jQuery UI, jQuery UI. Right, you do that, and then it's just loading. It goes into the service. Hopefully, it will resolve, and we'll pick up the versions that are applicable. Should be 1.11.14. Come on, internet, you can do it. Sometimes you have to close down the file and do it again. Oh, there you go. Oh, just when I was going to do it. I think it takes some time for that. There you go. So 1.14. And you also get intelligence with regards to the versions. So if you hover over things, it says latest stable version of the package, or I want anything that's minor or minimum version to be applied. Right, OK. I'll go with 1.14. Now, in here, console, where's the? Now, if I save, let me just open there's a view that you can see. It's the task manager, and that outputs what happens within when you do changes like that. So if we go here, the task runner comes up. I think it's also be output. If I pin it, see what happens. So if I save that, right, so it went automatically out to the Bower repo, and it just downloaded the package for us, so you don't have to do anything about it. Previous versions, you actually had to go right-click onto the Bower JSON and say download packages. That's not the case anymore. It automatically looks after the package management for you. Another thing I wanted to show you was dependency injection is actually now baked into the framework. You don't have to use third-party frameworks if you need to do DI. So let's see how you could do a very simple example of just adding a UI. So first, we need to add a new interface. No, I think that they went out with their own very lightweight DI, but then again, it's not a full-blown DI. You do have limitations at this point, but they are building on top of that. So new class. So I'm just creating a very basic interface that will just show a message, and then I need to add a class to implement that. Right, let's get that one in. Save that. And finally, we want one of the controllers to do some work. So we'll just reuse the DevWeek one. So let's just plug it in. Pass an interface in there. Service. There's one more thing that we need to do, and that is to actually add the DI in there in the services. Again, that's where we need to add all our dependency injection objects. So back into the startup page, there's a service again, as we said. which is further up. So in here, we put all the dependency injection objects. There's support for singletons and scoped and global DI. So depending on how you want to implement your dependency injection, then that's fully supported. And if we go back into, sorry, are we actually emitting a message? No, we're not. Back to the controller, sorry for that. We plugged it in, but we're not doing anything with it. Return message service. Where's my intelligence? What's the method again? Let me just go get it. No errors message there. OK, so we should see a message saying, we meet again. If I go here, no, that's the local one. So if I run that one, refresh. There you go. Simple as that. You just get intelligence there. I think that concludes my Windows demo. I'm going to switch machines now just to show you how to get things up and running on the Mac. OK, let's do that quickly. Okay. Right. First thing first, to get a new project up and running, in the beginning I was under the impression that it must be fairly easy to do so. I just check in the code from my Windows machine into GitHub, and then somebody goes and gets the code from GitHub, opens it on the Mac, and starts working. Unfortunately, it's not at that level yet. To do any work, you can actually do that, but then again, your commands are not going to work, intelligence is not going to work, and a few things are broken, so you have to tweak quite a bit of the code, and you have to actually work against the dev stream. So at the moment, if you want to work on the Mac, then it might be better to start on the Mac. And the way to do it is that you can use Yeoman, which is an ASP.NET generator. You install Yeoman through brew, and then what you do is you say yo ASP.NET. It loads up and says, right, what would you like me to use? And you can say, I want a web application to create. It will ask for the name, DevWeek demo. No, what? Install it. What did it do? DevWeek. So if we do cd. Again, you run the exact same command, so it's a kpm restore to restore all the packages for that specific project. You do it for that specific project? No, I'm in Hello World right now, so it just does it for a different project. I think I need to come out. OK, so again, it goes into NuGet, gets all the packages that are not local to your file system. Takes a bit of time. And then you can use Sublime or any other editor that you might fancy. Again, you see the very similar structure. You get your project JSON in the root with all the files. IntelliSense is not at the same level yet. To get IntelliSense within Sublime, you need to use OmniSharp, which is an open source project, again, as we said. A lot of people from the ASP.NET team are actually working on that project, along with other people from the community, just to help out. And let me see, where is it? What's it doing? Stuck. So within the Mac OS ecosystem, if you want to boot your application, you need to use a different web service. In this case, we are using Kestrel for that. And that's an open source project, again, that allows you to run websites on the Mac. I think it also runs on Linux. It's cross-platform. think we have an issue with the internet. If I open the controller, we should be able to see. So first of all, let's see the IntelliSense. If you follow at the bottom, as I type things, OmniSharp goes and does calls to the web service. So string. So the things that you see popping up on the screen are actually part of OmniSharp now. So you can say string test string equals. Really? And then IntelliSense at its full glory. Split. Oh, my IntelliSense is not working. I think my internet's down. Sorry? Oh, yeah. All right, yeah, you're right. No, but I think the IntelliSense should be working down here. Should be seeing a lot of errors coming in the console, a lot of messages coming in the console from OmniSharp. And I think that's an issue with the connection. There you go, that's better. Also does all the Bower tasks as well in the background. Uses Node, so you need to install Node on Mac as well if you don't have it. But I still don't understand why the OmniSharp doesn't work. So supplying. Okay, that worked. So that's in Hello World Dev. Right. Just find it. Where's my Hello World? Okay, Kestrel. So that puts up the local IIS. It says started, and I think it's running at port 5000, 5004. Yeah, see if I do. Oh, boom. That's your error message that you get in case something goes wrong. Multiple actions matched. Okay, so I definitely need to open that one. File, open. There you go, hello world. Open that one. Reminder. Yeah. Well, at least we can get the error page to work. Right. I was really hoping to show that before we ran out of time. KPM. lots of error messages. Oh, just warnings, okay. Okay. Now, this is going to fail catastrophically because Mac leaves open ports. We'll say too many files open. There you go. Address already in use. I came prepared. There's a bug actually with Mono right now. So if you run it once, then you get an error message. So you have to collect. There's a command that you can run. I'll probably blog about it because, oh no, I didn't want that one. I want this one. And then if I do Kestrel, I can do it. And that's where you get address is already in use, so we need to kill that process. So that's the kill 9:10:043. Right, and one more time before we wrap things up. Okay, start it. Oh, come on. I had to run it like 10 minutes before the demo. Right. Sorry? I don't know why it's not working. It built fine and installed everything. Right, I think that's all I have time for. We got a couple of minutes for questions. So, any questions, guys? Apologies for that. See what. Sorry, say that again.
What's actually in the core of .NET 5? What's being shifted out? What made things be?
First of all, there's no system web, right? So that's the biggest part that has been taken out. That also means that you don't get web form support. So that's out of the question. To tell you the truth, you can actually go into the repo and find out exactly what's there, but just be aware that anything that has reliance on system web and dependencies on that, so anything that depends on the system web is actually out of the picture, and that's quite a few libraries, hence the reason why it's come down so much in size.
Save functionality, the auto-compile.
Yep.
Does it persist session state?
Yeah, you can have your session provider. Right now, we haven't defined one. But if you download a NuGet package and say, I want to have session, then you can actually have session, yes. And that's also consistent across boards. So you have your, if you have your, say, your application running locally or on a VM, and it uses its own VM state, then when you deploy the cloud, which has a totally different layout, especially if you're running as a PaaS, then in that case, it will still use the same session provider, but it will have different internals.
You said 0-day security stuff gets patched
Yes.
automatically.
Yeah.
How does that work if the files are just sort of scattered around?
For the 0-day stuff.
Your folder structure along with your application. How does Microsoft know where to?
Or 0-day on the operating system, not. So I was talking about 0-day patches on the operating system, not on your web app, right? So the 0-day stuff that we discussed about that will be passed automatically are not relevant to your application. They're relevant to the operating system. But say if there was an update for the .NET framework, they're not going to push it down your throat without asking you or without testing. Yeah, yeah. That's why it's quite important they have that decoupling. Any other questions, guys? Nope. Well, thank you very much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much. Is that for any of these projects, you can just go and grab the repo, change it as much as you want, run it locally in a differentiated way, which is very exciting if you think about it, considering that in the old days you had to run everything the Microsoft way. The ecosystem today is quite different to what it used to be before. And on the right-hand side, you'll see you got the full .NET framework, which includes your ASP.NET 5, ASP.NET 4.6, the WPF stuff, and of course, what's that one? Windows Forms, yeah, and web forms. On the right, on the left-hand side, sorry, my right, your left. So on the right-hand side, there is the .NET Core. The .NET Core includes a smaller subset. So if you think about the .NET Framework having everything, the .NET Core is it's a smaller subset optimized for server deployment and cloud operations, and that includes the .NET Core, ASP.NET 5, and the universal apps. Underneath that, there's a nice layer that it's common for both frameworks. That includes your jitter, the new just-in-time runtime for Microsoft. Then you have your NuGet, and you also get the new Roslyn compiler, of course. And they're all open source. So the full stack runs on top of the common functionality. Now, some people might think that, right, OK, so we got the new stuff coming. What about the .NET Framework and where things are going? The idea is that there's going to be a parallel stream of development. The .NET team is not going to abandon the full framework just to go with the optimized version. So things that are coming in .NET Core, they will feed back into the full framework, albeit a bit slower, though, because that's a full massive deployment. You have to wait for the next massive release of the .NET Framework. Right. Now, another benefit of the fact that you have the common runtime and the new jitter is the fact that, say, if today you wanted to take advantage of the new features of Roslyn, for example, to run your web forms, you can do that. You can just download the Roslyn NuGet package, install it locally on your application, and then you can take advantage of the features that come with Roslyn. So you can see that they start to almost merge into one, although they are separate. This slide is quite interesting because you can see that in the center, what Microsoft is trying to achieve is in the center, they have the .NET framework plus your Visual Studio and all the other NuGet packages they can use. And then the idea is that they become so open now. So they allow you to take your stack, run it on a Linux server or a Windows server. And then for your front-end apps, again, they want you to be able to deploy your apps on iOS or Linux or Android or your Windows Phone or your Windows tablet. The idea is that you use one framework to do multi-platform work, which simplifies things for you. It makes development a lot easier. And also the fact that you don't have to rely on certain products. So you don't have to pay for a Microsoft server license to run your website. If that's what you want to do, you can do with your own flavor of Linux. And the road ahead. Right, so we are looking to have a lot more innovation. We are moving away from this monolithic .NET framework where things are just dumped onto you for every massive. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming on such a lovely, typical London morning where it's raining outside. I don't know if it's still raining out there. My name is Christos Matskas. I am a software developer. I work as a consultant. I do a lot of things. I do server-side development. I do mobile apps. I do front-facing client website applications. That gives me quite a bit of wiggle to test and try a lot of new things. I have a blog. I tend to be quite active on my blog, and I tweet quite a bit. And I have a few GitHub repos if you want to check them later on. Today, we will be discussing about ASP.NET 5, what's new, what's the new world order within Microsoft, where things are going. We'll see some of the features that are quite neat within the new ASP.NET 5, and then we'll try to do some demos. And if we have enough time, then I'll actually demo ASP.NET running on the Mac, which I think is quite a neat thing to see. Right, so people that have worked with Microsoft for some time, they know that they have been quite evil with regards to OSS in the past. They were quite adamant about providing any support to open source projects, and it was quite a very closed ecosystem. It was very hard to to see how things were happening, what was inside, and the internals of the Microsoft stuff. Right. What about today then? How are things going today? We are on the opposite side of things, where things are going crazy in the Microsoft world. I think back in 2007, there was a bit of a turn. Quite a few new developers joined the team, and there was a lot of discussion release that you expect to get. So you go from 4.5 to 4.5.1, 4.5.2, then 4.6, and so on. You do have that reliance, so you have to wait for Microsoft to release stuff. Things are going to become a lot more pluggable and a lot more modular, which means that you're moving away from that rigid structure, and you can say, right, I want to test this feature now, so I don't want to wait for the next release of a security framework, for example. Just plug it in and play, which makes things a lot more faster to work with. And of course, your end goal is to be able to run anywhere and everywhere. Okay. Right, so this is the existing silo approach that we are so accustomed in seeing. You got your Windows desktop applications, you got your Windows phone apps, you got your ASP.NET 4, and then you got your tablet or your store apps, and then ASP.NET 5. Now, these apps, sorry, these stacks, you can see they have a lot of common functionality. So you could still get XAML, you could still get C#, although they tend to have different flavors, as we probably got accustomed to see. And things are becoming a little bit more unified with Windows 10, as we've heard from the announcements. However, you still have that silo approach where you can't really share things between, which causes a bit of disparity. What also is a big problem is the fact that it takes sharing code across quite a bit of an issue. So the idea is that we are moving away from that, and we'll see a lot more updates coming through. The idea is that we want to take the framework and probably have quarterly releases coming in between some really high up guys thinking, what can we do for Microsoft? Where do we want to take things? And how can we embrace the community rather than trying to alienate more and more people? Starting that in 2007, I think the first open source project that was quite big was PowerShell. And that didn't have a massive impact at the time, but I think that was the kickstart for things to come. Come 2014-15, we had a series of major announcements, starting with a build last year where they open sourced Roslyn. And under the .NET Foundation umbrella, we ended up having a lot of open source projects that they are used massively today. There are over 32 open source projects. If you go to the .NET Foundation page, you'll see that there's a whole list of them. And there are more and more projects being added all the time. Some of the highlighted projects, of course, is Roslyn, which is the new .NET compiler, which will be used by the .NET 4.5 and above. You got ASP.NET 5, of course. You go .NET Core, which is a subset of the full .NET framework. SignalR, which is a real-time application framework. MS Build, which was announced just last week. I don't know if you guys use it. Some are really keen, some are not too keen. But the idea is it's open source. Again, you can take it and do whatever you want with it. Orleans, which is the engine that powers Hello. And I think it's also used for other big data projects. OWIN, which is an open web interface framework that allows you to demodularize the front end from your server by using modules. So it makes things a lot more, so there's decoupling there. You don't have to rely on the IIS stack to run things. And then you got, of course, NuGet. What this means for you